On my way to Dubai, I bought some Miss Brown. As the music like opera, she started to jam. So I hold she and I squishy, I was feeling real happy. Then she getting shy. She watched me and start to cry. How you jamming so? Like you feeling up a one. Mister, how you whining so? You come out to jump and not. Every time you swing your hand, you bump the parts on me, boy. You behaving just like if you want to eat me right there on the spot. Yeah, na na na. Yeah. Ding 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 ding. Sweet, 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 sweet. Ooh. I was planning to forget Calypso and go up and go into Tobago, but I am afraid I can't make the grade. But every night I lie down in my bed, I hearing a bass man in me head. Boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. I don't know how this thing gets inside me, but morning and evening, it driving me crazy. Like it taking me head for a panyard, but still every morning, like this fella gone mad. And if I don't want to die, he just put me in a trance. I don't want to, but I have to dance. Hey. And if I don't want to sing, when I start to do me thing, I don't want to, but I have to sing. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 bim, bam, boom, bam, bim, bam, boom, bam, bim. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hallelujah. Boom, hey, boom, 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 bam, bim, bam, boom, bam, boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boom, 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 boom.
Should okay. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to recognize the presence this evening at this auspicious gathering of Dr. Risa Noel, who is our host. We also want to recognize the presence of our panelists, Professors Giles Barrow, as well as Donovish. I also recognize the presence as well of Dr. Cleve Scott, and I believe I'm seeing in the audience the former Speaker of the House, Mrs. Rachel Ford. I want to recognize you, and forgive me if I get this one wrong, I believe the former press secretary to the Prime Minister, is it correct? Or, okay, but in the media. Okay, research officer. So I just want to recognize those faces. Also, I would hasten to recognize the presence of all of you who have gathered here this evening. We have had quite a bit of rain over the last hour or so, or two, and I believe that that would have impacted a number of persons who may have wanted to join us in person. Nevertheless, as we begin, I am looking at those gentlemen who provided us with the entertainment, and I would like to ask for a round of applause for those persons who are not so young like me, who have had the opportunity to know those songs. So it took us back down memory lane. The younger ones is okay, you will get there, don't worry. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for allowing us the privilege of actually hearing those songs. We are gathered here this evening because we have some important conversations to conduct. We are aware that the Department of Government Sociology and Social Work and Psychology in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies Cave campus, and I'm not a Caveite by any chance. I'm a graduate of the St. Augustine campus. So you missed part of your life, don't worry.
Check one, two.
So we continue. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so we are gathered here because we are about to examine the topic of continuity or change Vincentian views on the monarchy. Now, I am here because I do have a little background in history. As your host, you need to know that I have spent 39 years of my life in education, and I would have had a master's degree in history from the University of Warwick. I do hold a second master's in instructional management from the University of the West of England. I did my first degree at St. Augustine, as I intimated, also in history, and I spent some time at the University of Florida doing heritage studies. It is my distinct duty and honor to be chairing this evening's proceedings, and as we look forward to examining the topic and to advancing the conversations on the business of continuity and change, I am going to take this time to invite our Dr. Risa Noel to bring her welcoming remarks.
Thank you. Please allow me to adopt the protocol already established by our esteemed host, well, Mistress of Ceremonies, Mrs. Hamilton. And while I do that, I still have to acknowledge, of course, the professors from the UWI Caveville campus, my colleagues, Professor Devonish and Professor Barrow Giles. Welcome to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and welcome to our site. Okay, good night, everyone. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and cherished guests, it is my honor to accept the responsibility of welcoming everyone to the University of the West Indies Global Campus in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We gather here tonight to engage in a thought-provoking discussion that relates to identity and governance. The topic we will explore is continuity or change, Vincentian views on the monarchy and republicanism. First and foremost, I must extend our deepest gratitude to the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology within the University of the West Indies Caveville Campus, Barbados. Thank you for selecting the UWI Global Campus St. Vincent and the Grenadines as the venue for this significant presentation. Your choice honors our commitment to academic discourse and community engagement. We are especially privileged to welcome our distinguished speakers tonight, Professor Cynthia Barrow Giles and Professor Dwayne Devonish, both esteemed members of the UWI Caveville campus. To provide context, I will outline a few background details about the research project leading to this presentation tonight. The Visible Crown is a major interdisciplinary project funded by the AHRC and run by a team of researchers in the United Kingdom and the Caribbean. According to the Caveville campus's website, and I quote, "The Visible Crown in the Caribbean is a major international research project that examines the role and significance of the monarch as a person and the crown as an institution, from the era of decolonization to the present day. The project explores the reasons behind the surprising continuity of the crown in the region and traces how public attitudes towards monarchy have evolved over time. It situates contemporary debates about republicanism within their historical, political, and social context. A central component of the research is a cross-national study conducted in 14 Caribbean countries, capturing public views, sentiments, concerns, and proposals regarding the monarchical and republican systems of government," end quote. As we reflect on the topic tonight, continuity or change, Vincentian views on the monarchy and republicanism, we cannot help but recall the events surrounding the failed referendum in 2019, right here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 2009 rather, and the transition in Barbados to a republic. We look forward to learning of the key research findings from the Visible Crown project. I take this opportunity to put the spotlight on our global campus St. Vincent and the Grenadines site, which has a renowned history for executing distinguished events. Last October, the Honorable Justice retired Adrian Saunders, former president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, delivered our Sir Dwight Venner Memorial Independence Lecture on the topic, From Independence to Interdependence, Strengthening Caribbean Sovereignty Through Justice and Integration. On August 11, 2025, as part of Emancipation Month celebrations, Volume 1 of the Comprehensive History of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was officially handed over to the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines right here at our site. This seminal work was authored by 4 distinguished Vincentian historians, Dr. Adrian Fraser, Dr. Cleve Scott, Dr. Arnold Thomas, and Dr. Gary Denny. The event also featured a lecture titled Our Vincentian Civilization, Retrospect and Prospect, reflecting on the nation's journey and its vision for the future by former Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves. Next month, The Global Campus site, St. Vincent's and the Grenadines, and the Vincentian Association for Artists, Writers, and Producers will host our annual National Literary Fair and Arts Festival from March 9th to the 11th under the theme, Echoes of Our Heritage, Roots, Rhythm, and Reels. This festival is dedicated to celebrating literary arts and writing, performing arts, visual arts, and craft and functional arts. In addition, the Garifuna Heritage Foundation will host its 13th International Garifuna Conference here from March 11th to the 13th. The site remains committed to providing venue support and other significant contributions to ensure the sustainability of this important conference. We are also very well known for our service in delivering continuing and professional education courses in keeping with the UWI Global Campus's aim to provide high quality, flexible and accessible lifelong learning, addressing both pre-university vocational needs and advanced professional development. The CPE courses offered by this site are mostly online and accessible to local and regional students. Last month, we held our first CPE recognition ceremony to celebrate students who completed courses in semester 1 of the 2025-2026 academic year, and this ceremony promises to be held once per semester. We have activities to support our students enrolled in undergraduate and postgraduate degree programs, including our annual on-site student orientation session. And based on the data from the Global Campus, in 2024-2025, 962 students from St. Vincent's and the Grenadines were enrolled in undergraduate and graduate programs combined. The Guild of Students SVG chapter is a vibrant community offering support through initiatives such as its peer mentorship program, as well as its honor roll ceremony. In short, our site is very active. Ladies and gentlemen, as we embark on this journey of exploration and discussion tonight, I encourage everyone to actively participate in the discussions that will follow. It is essential that we engage respectfully and thoughtfully with one another. Thank you all for your support. God bless you all.
Just want to thank Dr. Noel for that comprehensive review of the work of the local chapter of the UWI. We are going to move right along, and we are going to invite Mr. Jim Maloney from the Drum Academy Incorporated. Mr. Iper Constance, you will come right after.
Yo. Yeah, hello. Hello, everyone. Well, this is Jim Maloney, Drum Academy. This is Mr. Kwame, Mr. Edgar Lewis. Excusez-moi, s'il vous plaît. Yeah, Mr. Edgar Lewis started the Jim Maloney Drum Academy. And we are at Central Market upstairs, the Central Market up across from Peppercorn. We have one tent upstairs for that to do a little drum. We have the live drum and a little bit mystic. Yeah, we have a mystic band and we try. All right, say microphone, check. I guess I got microphone check thing first, right? Microphone check, excusez-moi, s'il vous plaît. Yeah, that's okay? All right. Microphone check, 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 check. We're good to go. All right. Good. I want to be like, you know, people with the mic, you know. CS thing, embarrassment. All right, thank you. Yeah, same thing again. Different. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we have upstairs Central Market. We have the Jim Maloney Drum Academy, where Mr. Edgar Lewis created. Everybody in St. Vincent maybe know this young man. Okay, so we have Mystic Band. This is the drummer from the Mystic Band. He's just here filling in with Mr. And Eldon. Myself, singer Jude. I really live in Canada most of my life, but I'm here with you guys right now. So we're just gonna do 2 songs for you. Sorry, thanks, Mr. Cleve Scott, for inviting us here. So we're just gonna do 2 renditions, 2 songs here for you, right? This one is called. It's online. You could find it Together as One, and it's in Vincent a little bit. We think I talk too much, eh? All right, sing. Play the music today. Thank you for having us, and we're going to try and give you some dialogue with this stuff that you guys are doing here, because we know the Queen and the King, all that stuff got to go, right? Time for change. Yeah. Together as one, together as one, yeah. Together as one. Together as one, yeah. All right, give me it again. Forward, please. From the top, please. Excusez-moi, s'il vous plaît. Musicians, please. Give me the music properly. Guitar. Da-da-da. It happens sometimes, you know, it's live, right? Right? Together as one, United States of Africa, one land called Ethiopia. Together as one, United States of Africa, one land called Ethiopia. It's been too long to divide us and conquer all over the Caribbean. Yes, yes, it's been too long to divide us and conquer all over Mother Africa. Yes, I remember how they used us till they refused us. In this diaspora, I'll never forget. No, we, together as one. United States of Africa, one land called Ethiopia. Together as one. United States of Africa, the land that called Ethiopia. Since it's a beginning of a new era, let's not reward evil for evil. Let us do to the enemies like they've done unto us. Rastafari words always, and they must be respected, not neglected. Together as one, United States of Africa, one land. could find that song online still, eh? So Together as One, Singer Judah, by Singer Judah. We're going to do this one here for the tourist thing. It's online also, right? St. Vincent little, but we big, you know? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah, big man call I pal. Yeah, you know. Yeah. All right. St. Vincent little, but she big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. St. Vincent little, but she big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. From Kingston to Richmond, up in the Mesco Valley, up in Greg's, we shall really defend themselves, touching fancy. Oh yeah. Up in Georgetown, I'm a curling boat, little boat, she big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. St. Vincent little, but she big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. Take a trip, see the hospitality of the people. Take a trip, experience the hospitality of the people. The people them, rootsy, yeah. Well, the people them, nice, and they love the Father. Well, St. Vincent little, but she big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. Well, St. Vincent little, but it big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, so my boy, born and go. You know, as a teenager, take a little trip across the ocean. You know, in Montreal, Canada, Montreal, Quebec. But me never left yard. Always go forward to my yard. Hey, why? When a nice, when a nice, when a nice, when a nice, like yard. Hey, girl, what she little, what we big. Oh yeah. Well, hey, St. Vincent little, but she big. She little, but we big. Oh yeah. Well, hey, take a trip, see the hospitality of the people. Well, hey, take a trip. Together. Hey, St. Vincent little, but she little, but we. Yeah, merci beaucoup. Thank you. That's what we say now. Yeah, from the Jim Maloney Drum Academy, the cluster. Yeah, Mystic Band. Yeah, we Soul Cafe. Big up all the people them in the place, you know, Hyper, Mr. Cleve Scott, all the professor. Merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, good night. Yeah. Yes, this has been a nice setting here. But I say you must put your country. Yeah, take it easy. Get it from the start. Get it from the start. Get it from the start. Yes, let me say good night to everybody here. This song I'm gonna sing, it's called country first, okay? All right. A little bit more volume now. This country is full of diehards and strong heads. Most of them believe they can't really pinch. Well, they are strong supporters, you can believe that. And once the party's not in, they don't care about anything. Some just prefer the country to end up in a mess. And they will do anything to put it more in distress. Some on the job, they skylocking, doing anything, Lord. They hoping that government get the blame. But I say you must put your country before your party. For that is the only way, the only hope, good God, when the nation's prosperity. Believe me and put your country before your party. For progress and prosperity, strong economy, Lord, you gotta put your country, yes man. UPS and all you heads of department, I beg you to do your job with pride and with dignity. Cause I know most of you ain't up deep in politics, but it's time you see some concern for your country. From political warfare, I beg you to refrain. But that is what will change it, that's so far down the chain. Cause if we only work hand in hand and unite as one, Lord, our nation will really make a move on. But we got to put the country before we party. For that is the only way, the only hope, good God, to any nation's prosperity. Believe me and put your country before your party. For progress and prosperity, strong economy, Lord, you gotta put your country, yeah man. Trying to build a nation, but most of we in life could never see that. So our contribution is just criticism, because personally we ain't getting we pockets fat. I know more chance to finance party to elections, and when they can't get what they want, they just turn around, turn around. The truth is they just don't care if their country fall. They forgetting that we government do for one, they must do for all. That's why I say you must put your country before your party. For that is the only way, the only hope, good God, to any nation's prosperity. Believe me and put your country before your party. For progress and prosperity, strong economy, Lord, you gotta put your country, yeah man. Well, that one is put your country first, but I'm gonna give you another one called One Caribbean Nation. All right, let's go. If we try federation and it didn't work as planned, why should we now change our course of direction? The search for unification is
It's an important mission for our scattered people here in the Caribbean. Individually we just can't make it. Together we must fight and shape it for the benefit of we children. We gotta pave the road for them. So now with proper planning, our goals we will be achieving. With the grace of God the Almighty, we cross that bridge to victory as one Caribbean nation. One cultural projection. One God, one aim, one destiny. If we want to live our lives happy, we got to check for unity, yeah. One Caribbean nation. A regional integration. One God, one aim, one destiny. If we want to live our lives happy, we got to check for unity, yeah. Tell me how much have we profit when the big islands denounce it? They went on that egoistic trip, they thinking that they would benefit. Now Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, economy feeling real pressure. Their money keep on declining, so with the IMF they gone siding. The OECS consultancy controlled by the ECCB, a most stable economy. That's one aspect of unity. So with the whole region together, working under one umbrella, we'll be able to stand firm and mighty, holding we heads high for all to see, yeah. One Caribbean nation, one cultural projection, one God, one name, one destiny. If we want to live our lives happy, we got to check for unity, yeah. One Caribbean nation, a regional integration. One God, one name, one destiny. If we want to live our lives happy, we got to check for unity, yeah. Time is now more than ever for us to come together and putting our differences aside, forgetting body contention and strife. Let us now build strong foundation and start elevation to move on in certainty, leaving the problems behind me. For in this world there's so many changes. Europe now collaborating, despite the political policies, they are striving for unity. So we gotta take such a warning. For a new day is dawning, and forward to the 21st century, our people gotta move positively as one Caribbean nation, one cultural projection, one God, one name, one destiny. If we want to live our lives happy, we gotta check for unity, yeah. One Caribbean nation, a regional integration. One God, one aim, one destiny. If we want to live our lives happy, we gotta check for unity, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. Thank you.
Okay, we thank those two sets of artists for their work, and we would move right along into inviting Dr. Clive Scott to introduce the panelists.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Decima Alexander Hamilton. Good evening, everyone, especially those of you listening live on Nice Radio, those of you who are viewing this on UETV at a later date, and those of you who are listening on WeFM on Friday morning, and those of you who at some point would see it online, those of you on Zoom, and those of you listening on YouTube. So we know that this event will reach, by the end of this week, hundreds of thousands of viewers. I am the co-investigator on this project, which incidentally was launched here about 3 years ago. And I recognize the presence of retired Superintendent of Police Artis Davis, who I invited to that event. And he was so ecstatic that he brought out an entire entourage. And I see tonight he has brought another entourage. So thank you very much, Artis. I want to thank you before I forget. It is my responsibility to introduce the presenters. And first of all, I want to introduce Professor Cynthia Barrow-Giles. I've known Cynthia Barrow-Giles as long as I've been at the university. I remember one day sitting in a quadrangle and see two beautiful women pass across. And I investigated from my colleague who's now the Deputy Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Orny Sile, and he said, those are the future leaders of St. Lucia. Stay far. And that was Professor Barrow, and now the head of the global campus, June Summer, who is doing wonderful work for the university. Professor Barrow, sorry, not Barrow, that always happens. Barrow, Cynthia Barrow-Giles, right? She is a specialist in governance, women and politics, elections, constitutionalism, and political party financing. I would say to you that she has published on women in politics, and one of the women she has looked at is our own Ivy Joshua. One of the earliest works that looks at the role of Ivy Joshua in politics. She is now retired, but she is very active, still serving in different capacities. One of capacity I would like to underscore is her leadership of the CARICOM Observer team to the Guyana elections, that famous election that was highly contested, and I was worried for her safety during that period. From day to day, I would check in on her. She has, as a professor, you would expect that she has a very outstanding list of publications. You could Google her publications. She is a St. Lucian by birth and heart, always in St. Lucia, and I suspect deeply involved behind the scenes in the St. Lucia public life. She is a lover of Calypso. I can't leave out that one. One of the earliest engagement with Professor Barrow-Giles was as part of a panel selecting the top 50 women in Calypso in the Caribbean. And I think she deserves a special round of applause for that. Her recent work, along with other colleagues from the Cable campus, is on constitutionalism. And as part of this project, she has particular interest in the challenges of moving to Republican status across the region. And we would hear in the presentation later. Let's give a warm welcome for Professor Cynthia Barrow-Giles. Yes. Professor Dwayne Devonish has the reputation of being the second youngest professor in the history of the University of the West Indies. He became professor at age 36. And I know the tremendous sacrifice, because at age 36, I wasn't studying to become professor. Don't ask me what I was studying to become. But he has worked on issues around human resources management, strategic planning, organizational behavior. And I like to underscore the importance of organizational behavior because as a cadet officer under then Major Sinclair Leacock, he taught us many sessions on organizational behavior as a very important research methodology. Professor Devonish reminded me earlier that he was here during the COVID epidemic for 4 months. Obviously, at that time, Barbados was under lockdown, so I guess it was safe to be here mingling. That's why he was probably here. But we are very happy that he has joined us on this project and has been working very closely with Professor Barrow Giles, conducting this research, not only in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, across the region. I want to underline here that some people have been saying that this issue of whether or not we should move to Republican status was answered in the referendum of 2009. Right, Augustine? Have I did it right? 2009? Yes, Augustine. Augustine, as you all know, is a graduate of Caville in political science, and I understand that Professor Barrow Giles was one of his teachers. But it doesn't mean that his success or failures in politics can be ascribed to that. Right, Professor? Please welcome Professor Devonish to the podium.
Good evening.
Hello?
Hello. Okay, good. Okay, good evening again. Following the performance that we just witnessed, I think perhaps at this time of the evening, we may moment to appreciate once again the talent that we just saw on display in St. Vincent again. So, in our introductory comments, I want to be very quick, but I do want to take a moment to thank those of you who are online, and of course those of you who braved the weather today, and those of you who felt that you had to be here in person. I see many of my students, well, I see several of my students here. I know you are here because you are here to show some appreciation. I'm not recognizing Ms. Ford because she happened to be the speaker of the House of Assembly. I recognize her because when she came to Barbados in the, I think, late 1990s, as a very young lady, I automatically embraced her. And for me, she became an adopted daughter. And that relationship has continued. And I'm embarrassed to say, although Cleve had to tell you that I have retired, I don't know why he did that. But I'm embarrassed to say that I've also now teaching her daughter. And when she came on campus, she didn't have a daughter. So that tells you what is going on. Anyway, I want to move on very quickly to extend appreciation to Dr. Cliff Scott in particular, and of course, the members of staff of the Global Campus for their time and the effort in organizing this presentation on behalf of the Visible Crown Project in the Caribbean. And of course, let me take the opportunity to also thank Dr. Scott for the kind introduction. I am not going to deal with some of the perhaps misrepresentations. I wasn't in Guyana for the elections. I was in Guyana for the recount of the elections, which was more dangerous than the election. And I was there for 6 weeks. But nonetheless, I just want to move on quickly. In relation to our presentation today, what we intend to do is to examine the question that had previously surfaced in this country, and I think will more than likely resurface again, hopefully in the not too distant future. In 2009, as you all know, the question of the transition to republic was put to the people in the form of a referendum. While we are not here, Professor Devonish and myself, we are not here to discuss the merits or demerits of the politics of the referendum in 2009, clearly cannot be altogether avoided. Our research area is an issue that clearly touches on how, as a nation, you view yourselves, how, as a nation, you view, I think, your identity, what you think about your governance structures, what you know about the governance structures, and of course, what you think generally about constitutional development. Now, our presentation tonight, or I should say our presentation tonight, really represents a small, I think, yet a very significant part of the overall project on the visible Crown in the Caribbean. We felt that it was very important for us to share our results with Caribbean audience. And initially, we really wanted to share our results with all 14 of the countries that we in fact surveyed, share the findings with them. However, practical considerations, and primarily, I think, financial, meant that we had to narrow our focus, and ultimately we selected 2 countries only. So we did Antigua and Barbuda in December, early December of 2025, and we are here today in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to share with the wider public in St. Vincent and the Grenadines the results of our survey. The first country we had actually presented our results was actually Barbados, and that is because we tried to capture the sentiments of Barbadians prior to the transition to the Republic. That was obvious. So in 2021, even before we really began to work on the project, in 2021, Professor Devonish did the survey in Barbados, and we took the opportunity to, because it was during COVID, to present the results with Barbadians online to capture their views. And I think it was an important moment because there was a lot of conversation around the appropriateness of the manner in which the transition to the Republic in Barbados had in fact taken place. So both of us, as you could see, going to present the findings today. But before we get into actually presenting the findings to you, what we want to do is to share a few photos that will help, I think, help us to set the stage for this project. So the project starts in 1952, and that is, of course, before colonies in the Caribbean envisaged independence, before, of course, before independence became a distant possibility, far less what we're talking about here today, republicanism. And the story, our story begins with Queen Elizabeth, when Queen Elizabeth was installed as Queen of England, and the British realms and her early engagements in the Caribbean. Now, her early engagement in the Caribbean began in 1952. But I think for those of you in St. Vincent, that engagement as Queen, the first sight, the visible sight of her in the Caribbean was actually 1966. So 6 years after she was actually installed as Queen of England, and of course the British realms, whether in the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, or otherwise. So I just invite you, as you look at the photos, that you think about how the relationships have evolved over time. I think our relationship with the British monarchy, and certainly Queen Elizabeth, is a very complex one. I think we need to take some time to just try to remember, what Queen Elizabeth may represent to us, how we felt about her, and of course, how our thinking about Queen Elizabeth continued to shape our conversations today. But today, we are primarily concerned about how you as citizens and what you think about the monarchy and what you think about the prospects for St. Vincent and the Grenadines moving to a republic. So I'm going to begin by, and I'm not going to take much time on that, to just introduce the project. We heard something already about it. I think we heard enough details about the project. But I think it was important for me to at least identify the team, And so at the top, I don't know directions, but next to me then is the principal investigator, who is based, of course, in England. And all the other colleagues, except for Dr. Scott and myself, are in fact the British. It doesn't make sense for me to go through the issue of what the project is all about, because I think we heard sufficient about the project But I wanted to thank the funders of the project. Had it not been for them, certainly we could not engage in the kind of work that we are doing. Just to set the stage in terms of what we are going to do today, and I think most of my students would have an appreciation of how much I really respect Gordon Lewis. And so I thought it might have been appropriate in the context of what we're discussing to quote from Gordon K. Lewis. It's something that has always spoken to me. And he says that independence put an end at least to that particular absurdity in a society that has been full of absurdities, of ossified institutions existing like so many Egyptian-style mummies in the hospitable colonial climate of opinion. Now, when you read Gordon Lewis, and those of you who can get your hands on it, you really should take a look at it, if not the entire book, as pretty thick. Certainly the last chapter in that work, I think, is worth reading. But he insisted that independence merely represented a redefinition of the legal status of society without bringing in its wake a profound social metamorphosis. And those of us who are trying to see to what extent we can engage in reform of Westminster is about how we then ensure that we realize a fundamental change from that inherited political system. Now, in terms of the project itself, I just want to talk briefly about a little bit about the background and objectives. And I think to some extent you've heard about what it is all about. But St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I need not preach to you. As you know, is a constitutional monarchy. And today we have, I was going to say something, but that's too cheeky, so I'll leave it there. And so today we have King Charles II, who is serving as the head of state, but doing so through a governor general. That may be one of the ossified institutions that we need to think about in a very serious way. Now, that has the situation which has obtained since your independence in October, and there's an error here. Of course, it wasn't 1079, but rather 1979. But we continue to maintain the formal ties with the British. In terms of the project, we really have 6 objectives. This particular project, to assess the perceived importance of the monarch, whether it be then Queen Elizabeth or now King Charles to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We wanted to gauge public views of the royal family members, whether it be Queen Elizabeth, then Prince Charles, now King Charles. Also look at what we view about William, the heir apparent, and of course, then Prince Harry. We also wanted to assess the citizens' familiarity with different political systems. I think probably that was the most problematic for us, and we wanted to see to what extent there was continuing support for the monarchy in this country, as well as what is the level of support for Republican political system. Beyond that, we wanted to also explore the perceptions of citizens about what would be the benefits of republicanism, what are the dangers of republicanism, and of course, vice versa, what are the benefits and dangers, or what are the disadvantages of the monarchical system of government. And to a certain extent, we did try to capture the preferences of citizens in St. Vincent and Grenadines to the manner in which they felt that the head of state, for instance, should be selected. Now, in terms of the methodology, as we said before, it's a national public opinion survey, and because we were dealing with COVID, it meant that we had to change the method that we had envisaged. Originally, it would have, people have gone face to face, but we had to pivot. And so what we did was to employ a mobile device assisted enumerator administered instrument to capture as much data as possible on, the perception of the constitution of the constitutional status in the 14 countries that we looked at. In terms of the sample that we surveyed, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there were 502 adults, aged 18 years and older. It is in fact, like most surveys, a nationally representative sample, and with Professor Devonish in creating the survey, sought to achieve a balance across sex, age groups, and of course education levels, wherever that was possible. Of course, geographically, the instrument reached people not only in the leeward side of the island, but also the Windward, Kingston, and the other areas, as well as in the Grenadines. Specifically, where St. Vincent is concerned, the fieldwork was conducted the 1st to the 18th of August in 2024. So it's just a little over a year ago, about 18 months ago, that we completed the study in St. Vincent. I will now pass on to Professor Devonish, and what he's going to do is to look at the actual data, what he's saying about the perceptions of Vincentians to the issue of the monarchy and republicanism.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Professor Barra-Giles. And Professor Barra-Giles and I will tag team on these findings. And I'm happy that she provided the background on the methodology specifically, and the fact that the survey was done in such a way to represent the resident population of the country. And you can see here, in terms of the sex, age, and educational breakdowns, pretty much you have a slightly dominant female sample, 56%. You have about 45% of the sample between the ages of 35 and 54, and predominantly a sample that hovers in terms of education between the secondary and technical vocational and tertiary levels. So that's about over 70% of the sample. Now, in this survey, we wanted to capture different sections of perceptions when it relates to the monarchy and republicanism. Now, one of those sections dealt with the British monarch, the king, and the royal family. How do Vincentians view these agents? Now, one of the first questions we pose to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was how important, in their opinion, is the king to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now, we've done this survey in over 14 countries. And this was interesting. From our survey, we found that at least 62% of Vincentians that indicated that the king was at least somewhat important to the country. Now, at the same time, we recognize that there was some substantial amount of uncertainty or mixed attachment, because if you look carefully at the bottom, just under 20% indicated that they didn't know or don't care. But I want you to focus on that statistic, that's 62%. And I'm going to segue to another screen. Now, we did this survey, as I said, among 14 countries. So if we rank all 14 countries in terms of how important they perceived the King of England at the time, but the survey was done pre-2022. So at some point we were evaluating the Queen. You can see here that St. Vincent falls in number 2, 62%, just behind Anguilla at 70%. I want you to digest that.
And just to make the point that whereas we could understand why perhaps persons in Anguilla would be sort of favorable towards the monarch, because Anguilla is what you can overseas dependency or territory of the British. It's not quite understandable why St. Vincent scores so high or rates so high when you compare it with the other countries. And to also make the point that if you look towards the bottom of that table, what we'll see, and that is understandable again, what we'll see is that Guyana, you have 29.1%, which is a little bit,
more or less.
And then we have Dominica, which is also a republic at 7%.
With the British monarchs,
15%, and the third republic, Trinidad and Tobago, at 14.7%.
So we looked
When we had
the role of sex,
Done the
age,
Barbados survey,
and
by the way.
education.
Barbados had
Now,
not
when
yet
we look at
transited
sex,
to a republic.
men and women were broadly similar.
Interesting findings.
But
we wanted to dig
women
deeper.
were
So
more
what is
likely to rate the king's
profile
role
of respondents
as moderately
that were
important
more or less
relative to men. Men were more uncertain,
with the British
and that was
important.
again very interesting. Let's look at age. Now,
So we looked at the role of
perceived
sex,
importance of
age,
king
and education.
With age,
When we
the
looked at
strongest,
sex, men and women were broadly
moderately
similar,
important view
but
was found among the 65 plus.
women were
And it
more
remains
likely to rate
high
the king's role as
among the
moderately
middle
important
categories, 45 to 54 to 55
relative
to
to men.
64.
Men were more
Now,
uncertain,
when it reached the younger adults,
and that was
there was
again
more,
very interesting. Let's
there was
look at
more
age.
uncertainty,
perceived
or
importance of the king
more intensity
with age.
toward
The strongest,
being
moderately important view
unimportant. Now, in
was found among
education,
65 plus.
the views varied,
and it remained high
and we can see here that more
among the middle
education,
categories,
more
45 to 54,
formally
55
educated
to 64.
respondents were
Now,
the
when
more
it reached the younger adults,
interesting.
there was more
Tertiary respondents were most likely to say not important, or and
more
also have
intensity
higher uncertainty. So that's something that we can
being
actually discuss
unimportant.
probably at the end of this.
Now, in education,
discussion.
the views vary.
Now, one of the
and
other
you can
questions
see
we
here that
asked
more education
was,
the more formally educated
should Prince William, the
respondents
heir
were,
apparent,
the more support.
play an important role
Interestingly, tertiary
upon succession?
respondents were most likely to
Now,
say
with this question,
not
support
important
for monarch
and also have higher
that is the continuity
uncertainty.
of Prince William
So that's
taking up
something
the throne
that we can actually
in the
discuss
next reign
probably at the end of this.
was positive and
discussion.
moderately high, with just under 50%.
Now, one of the other key questions that we asked
indicating yes,
was,
they do believe
should Prince
that Prince William
heir
would play an
apparent,
important role.
play an important role?
But there's a caveat. There was a large don't know category of 31.8%, suggesting that the issue
Upon
was
succession.
not firmly decided.
Now, with this
on
question, support
any
for monarchs
citizens here.
Continuity. That
Okay,
is
so
the continuity
again, this
of
is
Prince
pointing
William
to some
taking up the throne
softening of opinion.
into the next reign was positive and moderately
Now, another
high,
critical
with just under
aspect of our
50%,
findings
49% indicating
was
yes,
the assessment
they do
of the
believe
royal
that Prince
family
William would play an important
members.
role.
And
But
this
there's a
these
caveat. There's a
included
large
the
don't
late
know
monarch,
category
Queen Elizabeth,
of
and
31.8%,
of course Prince Harry,
suggesting that the
William,
issue was not firmly decided for
in the pie again,
many
and
citizens
Queen
here.
Camilla.
Okay,
in
so
Queen
again, this is pointing to some softening.
And the evaluation was quite clear.
Another critical
You
aspect
can see
of
here
our
at the
findings
very top, the late monarch
was the
which garnered
assessment of the royal
51%
family
more than
members, and
in terms
these
of
included
acceptance or support
the late
from the
monarch
people of
Queen
St. Vincent
Elizabeth,
and the Grenadines, and
and
that
of
was
course
most
Prince Harry,
followed by
Prince William,
Prince Harry
King was in
with
the pie again,
44%.
and Queen
Now,
Camilla.
at the very bottom of the list, when we look at the low
And
favorability
the evaluation
rates,
was quite
we had
clear.
Queen
You
Camilla
can see here
and
at the very top,
see here
the
King
late
Charles,
monarch
was
garnered
close
51% more than
at the
half
bottom.
in terms of
Interesting.
acceptance or support from people of St. Vincent.
Now,
and
at this
Grenadines.
point, I'm going to segue
And that was closely
back
followed
to
by
Professor
Prince Harry,
Baragels to
who was
discuss
44%.
another section
Now, at the
of the survey dealing with the
Very
awareness.
bottom of the list,
of the political system.
when we look at the low
Yes,
favorability
we are
ratings,
asking
we
citizens
had
to
Queen
make
Camilla,
decisions about
and
important
you can see
governance
here
or
King Charles
constitutional issues.
was
And,
at the bottom.
it assumes that people have knowledge
Now, at this point, I'm
of
going to
those
segue
issues.
back
Across
to
the
Professor
Caribbean,
Baragels to discuss
I
another
think some of
section
this,
of the
what
survey
came
dealing
out,
with the
what
awareness
leapt out
of views
at
on
us
system.
very strongly, is that we are asking citizens to make decisions about important governance, what their political system is, how it functions. Far less it assumes that system is and people have knowledge. Yet we are asking of those issues, some critical decisions across the Caribbean. So when we ask, I think some of this, what citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines about, whether or not they were familiar, is that the monarchical system of government. We don't think that everybody is familiar with it. That is what exists. What their political system see that 12% said they were not familiar. Far less what Republican 15.6% said they were slightly. Yet we are asking them to make some critical. And then there are those who say, 33% they are somewhat. So when we ask citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines about now, you had a referendum in 2009 with the monarchical system. And I know that's a generation ago. about the
that is what
Republic.
exists. We see that
But when we ask
12%
about the
says they were not
Republic,
familiar.
in 2024,
15.6% said they were
just about
slightly familiar
20%
with it.
indicated that they were not at all familiar.
And then there are those who say, well, 33% they are somewhat familiar,
slightly
moderate
familiar,
or extreme.
with 29, 20% and 29% and 13% respectively familiar. Saying they were
You had a
somewhat
referendum in
moderately or
2009,
extremely familiar.
and I know that's
with
a
the Republican
generation
system of government.
about the Republic.
We went on and asked, and
When we ask about the Republic,
that is
in 2024, just
find
about
out
20%
whether or
indicated that
not
they were not
citizens would
familiar.
support the monarchy, the
16.2%
retention
said they
monarchy,
were slightly familiar,
or they
with
favored
29,
Republican system.
20% and 29%.
And what we found was that
saying they were
if you look at the
somewhat moderately or
statistics,
extremely familiar,
there is some
with the
support for the
Republican
Republic,
system of
very
government.
clear here.
we went on and asked
And we see at
and that is,
39.1%
we wanted
is
to find out
more than
whether or
double
not
the support for a republic
citizens would
at
support
18.2.
the monarchy, the retention
I'm
monarchy,
sorry, for the
or
monarchy
they favored
is more than
a
double the
Republican
support
system
for
of
the
government.
republic at 18.2.
And what we found
There's
was
more
that,
support
if you look at
for the status quo than there is
there is
for
some
a
support for the
change
republic, very
in
clear
the
here.
nature of the political system. There are some people who are very much
and we see at
undecided. They're on the fence, so it could go either way.
more than
And that is to
double
say,
the
you get
support
see
for a
33.1% that
republic
says
at
whether or not we go to
18.2%.
republic or we stay as a
I'm
monarchy,
sorry,
it really
for the
doesn't
monarchy,
matter.
it's more than double the
33%.
support for the
So
republic.
if we
at
add
18.2%.
33% to, of course,
So there's more
39.1%,
support
you're getting
for the
something like
status quo than there is
77%.
for a
Would have
change
absolutely no
in the
problem with
nature of the
the
political
existing
system. There are
system
some people who are
staying
very
as
much
it is.
undecided.
And
They're
then,
on
of course,
the
we have
fence.
the don't know and
So it
don't
could
care,
go either way.
which you can
That is to
always,
say, you
in
can see
fact, tap into.
33.1% that says whether or not we go to the republic or we
So
stay as
we
a monarchy, it
concluded
really
here
doesn't
on the
matter.
basis of this,
33%.
especially given the
So if we
either is fine,
add 33%
that
to,
the
of course,
opinion in St.
39.1%,
is
you're getting
leaning
something like
really
77%
to
would have absolutely no problem
maintenance
with
of the status quo,
existing system staying
right?
as it is.
Now,
Then, of course, we have the don't
we
know
also
and don't care,
looked at
which you can always,
West St.
in
Vincent and
fact,
Grenadines
tap
fell
into.
in relation
So
to the
we
14
concluded
countries
here
that
on the
we
basis of
surveyed.
this, especially given the
In terms of the support
that
for the
the
republic
opinion in St.
versus,
Vincent and Grenadines
support
is
for the monarchy. And you'll see that St. Vincent and Grenadines in terms of data
maintenance of the
data.
status quo. Right?
In terms of support for the republic, it's about 18.2%. If in terms of the monarchy, however, they rank at number 5. It shouldn't surprise us if you look closely at the data that the republics, the existing republics, scored high in relation to support for the republic. That's fairly obvious. And so we have Guyana, which is the oldest of the republics in the Caribbean, at 87.45%. And it shouldn't therefore surprise us that Guyana comes at the bottom of the table in relation to support for the monarchy. Very few people have recollection of what the monarchical system is all about. So it's just a matter of 4.66%. Trinidad and Tobago also scores pretty high, more than half of the population supports. What is surprising here for us was the results from St. Lucia, where 54.73% of the population support a republic. It shouldn't surprise us when you look at the other side of the table that, in fact, it was those territories which are overseas dependent territories of the British that supported the retention of the monarchy. So that we have Montserrat, we have Anguilla, for instance. But in there, we see 2 countries, and that raises some question. We have Belize here, and we have Grenada. And perhaps Belize is more explainable than Grenada. That requires more investigation. If anybody knows anything about Belize, you know Belize has been embroiled in a border dispute with Guatemala for decades, and perhaps more than decades. And there's a fear, whether it's real or not, but there is that palpable fear that if they transit to a republic, they would lose what they think is the protection of the British and could possibly invite Guatemalan invasion and seizure of Belizean territory. So that Belize didn't have a referendum. One of the successful referendums that we've had in the Caribbean The story of the referendum in the Caribbean is a very unhappy one, but Belize had a successful referendum. Also, a referendum took place in Guatemala almost simultaneously, in which Belizeans agreed to allow the international court to sort of mediate and to make a final decision as to what is the border, legitimate border of Guatemala and, of course, Belize. And that is the story of a successful, referendum in the region. But towards the end of the discussion, I will say some more about the unhappy story of the referendum.
Yeah, thank you. And again, one of the things that we wanted to do with that sentiment or support for monarchy versus support for republicanism was to dig deeper. So again, we looked at the relationship that sex, age, and education had with these sentiments. And you can see clearly when it came to sex, women were more Republican in their sentiments, pro-Republican than men. Younger adults were relatively more Republican or pro-Republican in their sentiments than older ones. And Republican support was highest among those with technical vocational education and lower among secondary and tertiary educated respondents. So something to digest. Yes. So I know that we'll have a body of questions coming at the end on these findings. Now, my favorite section really was to examine what the perceived benefits of the current constitutional status, the monarchy, the constitutional monarchy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines from the vantage point of Vincentians, and what would be the counterbalancing benefits of moving or transiting to a republican status. So we asked the question. So one of the first questions we asked, has St. Vincent and the Grenadines benefited from the monarchy? Almost half of Vincentians acknowledge or definitively agreed that there were benefits tied to the monarchy. Now, something to note as a counterbalancing point, 1 in 4 actually expressed they didn't know. So again, this goes back to the question of knowledge. Now, the next question we asked directly after was, do you expect, or rather, what do you think would be the impact of moving the country to a republic? And you can see here that 68%, the relative majority, noted that they were neutral. They were indifferent about the question. With only 15.8% noting a positive effect against 16%, roughly an equal percentage, indicating a negative effect. So most respondents do not foresee major consequences of moving the country to republican status. Again, this is consistent with the earlier knowledge gap. So you'll see that there's this recurring theme throughout this presentation. Now, we wanted to compare the perception of benefits of the connection with the British monarchy and the perception of positive benefits moving the country to republic among the 14 countries. So if you look at where St. Vincent and the Grenadines actually fell, right at the bottom. So if you look in terms of the question, now remember the question that was asked, what do you think that your country has benefited from the monarchy? And you can see here 49% and 15%. My apologies, that should be 15%. If you look at the 15.8, it fell at the bottom when it came to the positive move, the positive impact to move to a republic. So that's 15.8%. That's the lowest percentage. So what this is effectively saying then is that among the 14 countries, St. Vincent and Grenadines had the lowest relative percentage of people who believed that there would be benefits if their country were to transition to republic. On the other side, you can see here, which is the benefit of the British monarchy, St. Vincent and the Grenadines ranks in the top 3 countries with constitutional monarchies and the overseas dependencies that perceive benefits with their existing system. So we're getting a clear theme.
A little odd. Sorry. It's a little odd. You have 2 overseas dependencies scoring very high, and then you have St. Vincent and the Grenadines at 49.9%.
Yeah. Definitely something worth discussion. Now, the question you probably have at the back or perhaps the front of your minds is, but what are the reasons that Vincentians are given for these advantages, whether they're perceived or real? And that, my friends, was actually posed as a question. So we asked the question in an open-ended way. We asked Vincentians, so tell us, in your opinion, what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of each system? The system that you have, the constitutional monarchy, and the system of the republican. And you can see what we did here was to summarize the key themes. So I want to go through this carefully. So when it came to the advantages, the common themes or reasons, or actually express advantages of staying with what they had, the constitutional monarchy, were included sentiments surrounding aid projects, the visa-free status that they hold with the United Kingdom, British Navy employment claims, backup security framing. So it was all about this protective benefits that we were seeing here. Now, when it came to disadvantages of the current system, you would hear the term never fully independent. So yes, we have independence, but the key disadvantage that we still wedded to this system. All right, there's this over-reliance or restriction of a British monarchy. Now, in terms of the advantages and disadvantages of the republic, the advantages included decisions made within the country. So this, this autonomy, this full autonomy, this is what full independence looks like, and that the sentiment that this would allow for growth. Now, the disadvantages of becoming a republic were interesting. Many argue that there would have been a lack of resources if we shifted. You cannot call on the outside help if you're in need. Now, I think one of the things I thought about was the volcanic eruption. And it was interesting because when we were looking at Montserrat, they had a situation, as you all remember, years ago. And when we checked the data, one of the reasons that they were happy retaining their overseas dependencies, because Montserrat is an overseas dependent, was the fact that they believe that the United Kingdom would provide help in case of a disaster like that again. So I want you to see how these things can fill in. So the risks of power abuse. So there's also this whole belief that if we had to move to a republic, it opens up or exposes us to the risk of abuse of power from within. Poor choices, currency depreciation concerns. These are all sentiments and reasons. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do now was, okay, so we have all of these perceptions of benefits of retaining the monarchy and perceptions of benefits for moving to the republic. Do these perceptions have any weight on whether someone supports retaining the monarchy or moving to a republic? So what we did was a correlation. We correlated the variables. And as it's not surprising, it was actually expected that we found that there was a connection. Those who perceive advantages in retaining the monarchy were much more inclined to support maintaining the current constitutional arrangement. That was a very strong correlation. Now, there was a similarly strong connection between how much people believe St. Vincent and the Grenadines would benefit from becoming a republic and their support for that transition. Now, in simple terms, individuals who saw clear advantages, clear benefits in transiting to a republic were far more likely to support that transition. So, what does this tell us? That perceptions of benefit strongly shape political preference, or at least constitutional preference. Now, one of our other key important sections of findings that we were able to extract concerned the views on a referendum, and this will be a future referendum, and the preferred type of president if they were to transit to a Republican status. Now, the question that we had for them, should the country hold a referendum? And this was done in 2024, this survey. Should the country hold a referendum for a Republican decision? Now, a majority, more than 50%, 55.6% to be exact, wanted a referendum. So what does this tell us? It signals the notion of a procedural legitimacy, that people want to be in the decision-making seat when it comes to this decision, this particular issue of moving or not to a Republican status. I want you, though, to note that still 1 in 3 Vincentians noted very clearly that they do not know. And if you add that to don't care, that's close to about a third. Yeah. So again, you having that knowledge gap playing a major role in these findings. Now, we asked a conditional question. If the country were to transit to republic, what would be the preferred type of presidency? So we had several options. So we had the option of the executive president, the president that has the powers, similar to what you might see in Guyana. You have the ceremonial president, which we see here in Barbados, in the region, and in Trinidad and Tobago. Interestingly, I want you to watch this. For those who had support for the transit to Republican status, nearly half didn't know what model they prefer. Again, confirming this limited constitutional literacy. However, among those who chose, executive presidency was much more attractive as an option than the ceremonial. So you can see the numbers there already. It's 32%. Yeah. That's about almost 3 times as much. Chose the executive presidency over the ceremonial version. Now, adjacent question that we asked was the preferred method for choosing a president. Now, there was an overwhelming preference for direct popular election. In other words, Vincentians said that if a president were to be selected, that should be done democratically, elected directly by the people. 73.1%. That was overwhelming. I believe the next category was don't know. So again, you see that knowledge gap prevailing in its head. Yeah. So these were our core findings. Let's look at our central takeaways. So monarchy preference in St. Vincent and the Grenadines exceeds Republican support. But we can see that there's still a large soft middle, and we still have a significant knowledge gap on this subject of these two systems, constitutional monarchy relative to the Republican style. We also saw that there was a strong expression that the British monarch, the king, has at least somewhat importance among over 60% of Vincentians. We also saw that referendum support was strong, even among those not fully decided. And we also found that if a republic is to be pursued, yes, the public is generally uncertain about its design, but the executive type presidency still appears to be more appealing than the ceremonial ones. So some food for thought. At this point, I'll segue back to Professor Barr-Giles.
So Yes, sorry. So we're coming to the end, but I thought it was important, or at least we thought it was important, for us to also consider whether or not, against this backdrop, whether or not there is in St. Vincent and Grenadines, as indeed all the other Commonwealth Caribbean countries, there is in fact fertile ground in support of republicanism. And I want to couch the discussion within the context of your own constitution and what it says about, altering the basic structure of your constitution. Because once you're talking about shifting to a republic, it's about shifting that basic structure. And in a number of states, and certainly the Caribbean is probably one of the best regions, exemplifying that it is not so easy to change the basic structure. Our constitution sets out fairly detailed provisions that we must follow in order to change the basic structure. So we have ordinary changes that you want to make, which require very slim majorities, etc. But in relation to the basic structure, i.e., the nature of the political system, whether or not we want to change the judicial system. For instance, those of us who still need to go to the Caribbean Court of Justice, it requires special provisions. But one of the key things is that there is a mandatory referendum. And I think that is a problem in relation to the ability of a number of Caribbean states where there may be an interest in making that transition to actually realize the transition. Now, in the wake of the death of Queen Elizabeth, and certainly in the wake of the transition of Barbados to the Republic, we heard a number of Caribbean governments saying that they were going to, or declaring that they were going to make the transition. Antigua and Barbuda, for instance, announced that in 3 years' time, they were going to make the transition. Well, 3 years have passed and there have been nothing. We also heard perhaps something almost akin to that in St. Lucia, in Jamaica. We heard a similar conversation. I'm not too sure where Billy stands in relation to that, but a number of Caribbean countries were in the throes of a discussion around making that transition. And the ease with which Barbados made the transition, I think, was one of the reasons. But the difference between Barbados and most of the other Commonwealth Caribbean countries is that Barbados does not require a mandatory referendum. All you need is that special majority in the parliament, and you are good to go. And Barbados has 30 love. Well, at times somebody had crossed the floor, so they are 29, so it was very easy for them to make the transition. Belize is a similar situation where they do not need the referendum either, but the Belizean situation is fundamentally different to the situation elsewhere in the Caribbean. So we have these mandatory referendums, and they therefore signify that what is anticipated here is that we have a certain level, or we have participatory democracy, that the people are the ultimate deciders of whether or not that transition can be made. That is not Parliament that ultimately going to decide it, because even if Parliament endorses it, agrees, and you have support from both sides of the bench, or you have a government with an overwhelming majority and could easily, in fact, reach that magical 2/3 or even 3/4 in the Parliament, ultimately they must go to the public. And what we are seeing based in St. Vincent is that there is a sort of a knowledge gap. And the question arises as to whether or not in a referendum that is required in the Constitution, whether or not they will vote in the way that those who are pushing a Republican system will realize the dream. So when we look at the Constitution, those provisions that relate to the basic structure, as I said before, it demands that referendum. So this is not a voluntary referendum that you can sometimes have. It is mandated. It must, in fact, take place. And so when we look at the Caribbean text, and quoting Tracy Robinson et al., they argue that the text of every Caribbean constitutional provision may be amended or altered, but the manner in which alteration may take place differs according to the provisions being altered. And the highest bar is, in fact, for changing that basic structure of the Caribbean. So If we, for example, if we look at Antigua and Barbuda, and the same thing goes for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, what you see is a situation where they require a two-thirds majority. And anyone familiar with the work of global constitutionalist Richard Albert, he's argued that this is a major constraint on the ability for us to engage in fundamental change of our constitution. And he calls that the constraints that the constitution imposes upon people when real change is required, or what he calls the handcuffs. The constitution actually handcuffs our capacity to engage in change, even when we would like to see. Where your constitution is concerned, of course, I think you can look at section 38 of the constitution, which requires, it's very entrenched. It requires 2/3 of all members in both houses. Well, in your case, you know what I mean by both houses, right? We talk about the Senate, we talk about the House. Agreeing, supporting, and of course, you have the referendum, which is mandatory. And in that referendum, you must have also a very high, there's a very high threshold which has been established of 2/3 majority. And you can read your constitution very clearly in section 38. It says, a bill to alter any provisions of this constitution, and of course also the Supreme Court order, shall not be regarded as being passed by the House unless in its final reading, the bill is supported by the votes of not less than 2/3 of all representatives. And it goes on to say at number 3, that a bill to alter this section, the schedule of this constitution, or any of the provisions of this constitution specified in part 1 of that schedule, or any of the provisions of the court order specified in part 2 of that schedule, shall not be submitted to the Governor General for his assent unless there has been an interval. So there's a time delay as well. There's been an interval of not less than 90 days between the introduction of the bill in the House and the beginning of the proceedings in the House on the second reading of the bill. And after it has been passed by the House, the bill has been approved on a referendum by not less than 2/3 of all the votes validly cast on that referendum. So in looking at St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if I just go to the next one first and then we'll come back. What we see is that the process of amendment is in fact very detailed. And all 3 elements must be in place. You have a specified parliamentary vote majority in both houses voting separately. That is a typical thing across the Caribbean. There's an opportunity for public to participate via the mandatory referendum. And of course, there is the time delay, what people describe as, a time for mature reflection, that time delay. St. Vincent and Grenadines, as I indicated a while ago, is very similar to most of the other Caribbean countries if you look at this particular table. So that what we see here, the countries which differ would really be Barbados and Belize, as well as Trinidad and Tobago, where the referendum was not required. So obviously in those 3 countries, it would have been relatively easier for them to make the transition than in the other Caribbean countries. If you look at, we talk about Belize, but if you look at Guyana, for instance, you require a majority. In Jamaica, a majority. So that is hopeful. You just need 50 plus 1% and in a referendum, you're okay. The problem is for countries like Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia, that require not just a bare majority, but a hyper majority. And so that hyper majoritarian element, in addition to the referendum, is going to pose difficulty for countries who really want to go in the direction to be able to achieve it. So then we ask ourselves then, where are we? Where is St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Does the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines have the requisite support to get to first base? And of course, before I could get to that point, I wanted to just again, because I know there are people in here who perhaps were hardly born when the referendum was held. Not many people, but still, in 2009, on November 25th. That was a significant moment in the, of course, constitutional development of the country, or the potential for constitutional development of the country, because the referendum sought public approval for a new constitution. And Clive likes to remind you that one of the problems with that referendum is the package, the way in which it went to the public, putting all things in one and asking Vincentians to vote on the entire package, rather than isolate specific issues and then having a referendum. That doesn't mean it would have worked, because in Grenada, they did put several bills, separate bills to the people, and every single one of them failed, including something as basic as changing the name of Grenada to reflect that there is more than just Grenada, and that there are islands, other islands, the Grenadines, and they rejected that as well. In Grenada, they asked another question, something that we always talk about, that there should always be a leader of the opposition. And the opposition had wanted a no. And that too was the very opposition. And that too was defeated. I'm not going to say anymore, but you understand the point I'm making. We are highly partisan in the Caribbean. And whether or not we support a particular issue, intellectually, we suffer from cognitive dissonance across the Caribbean. I won't say anything more politically. I leave that there. So what we get was that the Constitution, the referendum did not support the idea of changing that 1979 Constitution. We can move on. So we can move on. Okay, so yeah, sorry. So what I'm saying then, that given what took place in 2009, the referendum decision, clearly republicanism in this country was deferred. And when you look at the results, those who supported was 43%. It fell below. Those who were against was 55%. But you had a pretty low voter turnout as well. So what we see in this country is that the super majority trap, which is provided for in the Constitution, makes it extremely difficult. That constitutional handicap that required that mandatory referendum and for you to have 2/3 support in St. Vincent has resulted in a situation where clearly, the referendum failed. Had St. Vincent and the Grenadines, even if you had a simple majority in 2009, the referendum would have in fact failed. And I came across, this took place in 2009, but I thought I wanted to share this with you. It's very interesting. That in a commentary on the 2009 referendum, headlines across the world, you heard another REM says no, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and then from your own, Andrew Cummins, who unfortunately is not with us any longer, he says, and I quote, both from a political standpoint and the Constitution, this is a massacre. That is what no sitting government, of course, would like. So what we are saying, therefore, is that given the failure, given what we're saying about people and their support for the monarchy, that there is a kind of institutional stickiness across the Caribbean. That although we are criticizing our institutions, it seems to be glued. It's very sticky. And we can come to that conclusion partly on the basis of the failure of the referendums across the Caribbean. And so when we look at that chart, we see, almost everywhere we have had a referendum. If you look at, 2009 failed in St. Vincent, in 2016 and 2018 both, it failed. Every single one of the bills failed in St. Vincent in 2016. And the one they had after that in 2018 also failed. In Antigua and Barbuda, you have it failed as well for extremely low voter turnout. In Belize, it passed, and I explained to you a while ago why that passed, and it passed at 55%, which is still fairly low, but Belize requires just a majority. The second one in 2019, it also passed with the same majority, and of course, as you know, in Barbados, the outcome in terms of making the transition was successful because Barbados's constitution does not require the change. So we can conclude that what apparently partly shapes, we're not talking in totality, but what apparently shapes the outcome is the amendment thresholds, the degree of elite consensus, and the extent to which you have partisan polarization in the country. In Barbados, in in Belize in 2019, you had some consensus for obvious reasons. And in Barbados in 2021, I'm not saying that there was elite consensus because there was a lot of concerns about what was taking place, but you had a one-party parliament. So you had the transition before the referendum. And so these two countries really serve as counterexamples where the threshold in one country is low, and you have two in Belize as well, the political elite on that issue quite unified. In Barbados, you had the opposite. When we talk about St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I could say that the kind of constitutional reform of the kind that was anticipated in 2009, what we hope would be anticipated for all the Caribbean countries, perhaps they can succeed, perhaps if everything comes together. But from what we've seen about public perception, it may be a little doubtful. So what does this portend? I'm suggesting to you there are some questions that remain unanswered, and clearly more work needs to be done, but we have no money. That has to be said. You know, doing research of this kind requires a lot of financing. So I would say to you that as we look back, we could still ask the questions. Why did the events of 2009 unfold the way they did? And if we have to cast our mind forward, you must also wonder, could a future referendum in St. Vincent lead us down the same path or somewhere entirely new? I really don't know. But what I did was to try to match support for republicanism that we have seen from the survey data and the constitutional requirements for amendments in the country. And I've noted already that what is required is a supermajority, and that acts as the constraint or the handcuffs. So yes, we'll say right now. Remember, we did this in 2024, but there's been elections in the country in November, right? And so you have a government which clearly has that necessary parliamentary strength to do it if it so desires, because you have 14 with one opposition. So they don't need the opposition support in relation to amending the constitution. Yes, the constitution, however, says you need 2/3 support, so they have that. So the material basis for it constitutionally at least, or electorally at least, exists. But we butt up against what the survey is saying to us, where you only have 18% support for republicanism in this country, when the referendum requires 2/3 majority. I'm going to end here by saying that clearly a lot has to be done if that is where it is Vincentians politically would want to go. And I want to thank you for coming out today, this rain, to give us your attention.
I believe we can do better than that. Thank you very much for that thought-provoking presentation. I'm pretty sure we have questions, but I need to establish the timeline. How much time do we have for questions? How much time? 15 minutes? Okay, so just shoot your hand up for me, please, if you do want to pose a question to the panelists. Somebody would collect the Zoom questions for us. Who's going to be up first to ask a question? Or you can make a comment. I have a quick question in the meanwhile when they're making their minds up. I'm wondering in terms of the economic consideration. Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask in terms of the socio-economic considerations, in terms of the respondents. That was one. Yes. Mine just had to do with the socio-economic background of the respondents, in terms of your...
I just want to ask, For the recent development that been taking place with the Royal Highness and its whole monarch situation with the Jeffrey Epstein saga and all these kind of things that happening now, I think the way how we vote, the way we think before it will transfer, have a different outcome if they have a referendum as to if we still want to continue with the monarch situation, present state, you know, because as I say, as life goes on, you know, the way you think yesterday and the different changes you see taking place between yesterday and today, you know, people will have a different philosophy or idea of thinking or whatever. So just I want to shine that light so that they could open some kind of, or maybe make things a little better for people understanding. That's all I want to.
I mean, there's not much to say. That's an interesting observation. I just want to make the point that the former Prince Andrew, was not one of the people that had a major impact on the psyche of Caribbean people, and certainly not the psyche of people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As you could see, it was either the Queen or the then Prince Harry, who was well grounded, and people seem to love Harry for different reasons. Prince Andrew really didn't feature in that, and I'm not sure to what extent that is likely to shift people's view on whether or not they support the monarchy or they don't support the monarchy. But you have a point, because it does make the monarchy a little more human, a little more fallible, and maybe if that is the case, it might shift the needle in terms of the sort of way in which we sort of valorize the monarchy. Some of that shine may certainly go, and maybe it might shift. Maybe it might shift the needle a bit. No.
Hello, my name is Edward Kwamilo. I just want to ask that this country, right, that had the easiest form, 50+1, is it because the two parties in the country, the two dominant parties in the country, did agree with independence?
That's a good.
Yes, because, and I could comment the reason why I asked that question. Yeah, you could answer and I have an idea why.
Okay, well, go ahead.
No, because in my time, the parliamentary opposition party in our country did not support independence, right? And I was told the reason why the bar so hard in Grenada too is the same thing. So it appeared to me that those countries, when they got the both parliamentary parties support independence, the bar to move to republicanism is much easier because you have a agreement from a position in the society. But what you have in our case, the parliamentary party said, no, me no want independence. So that I believe that the reason why this thing to have.
No, Kwame is right. The problem goes back to 1969 between Joshua and Cato moving to associated state where they had the same problem. There are so many petitions that went to the Committee of 11, I think they're called. It's an issue that I'm working on right now. That same 1969 issue to independence.
Yeah, but I don't think, I'm not talking about St. Vincent. You're more familiar. But I don't think that really applies to all of the Caribbean countries. There are different reasons. I think the more common approach, as we saw, is to have the two-thirds majority. It's just a small minority of countries that have decided to go for the lower level of a slim majority.
Right. In recent times, we saw that some fractures has been developing in CARICOM. I am wondering whether or not if we move to republicanism, that would strengthen CARICOM solidarity.
Again, that's an interesting question, but I don't necessarily see a connection between the political system that we have and CARICOM. Now you open a can of worms because to talk about CARICOM and to talk about all the fracture we've seen more recently involves an entirely different kinds of conversation that I don't think can be reduced to, some passing comments. I think it would be doing it an injustice. But certainly for a number of years, when we look at CARICOM, they have had some fundamental differences. And more recently, we have seen the differences escalate. Certainly, we have to be concerned. I suppose I can say so. I don't really care. We have to be concerned about the position that Trinidad and Tobago has adopted under this particular administration. But I don't think necessarily that we can make the kind of connection. I wouldn't want to make that kind of connection on the fly. The truth of the matter is that Trinidad and Tobago is a republic, and yet Trinidad and Tobago is almost an outlier to where the other Caribbean countries are. So I wouldn't want to say that there's a causal relationship between the two things.
Good night, panelists. I want to thank you, first of all, on presentation to the public. It's insightful. It's an eye-opener. And I'm quite sure some persons may not have even expected those numbers that you presented. It's quite interesting. Similarly to for Grenada. But I have a question putting into the survey itself. One, whether any contemplation was made to include persons' perception towards monarchy or republicanism, or even referendum on how they will vote based on political persuasion. Secondly, whether future instances, if any future referendum can actually be insulated from partisan politics. And thirdly, what recommendations will you make for another occurrence where we can go different to prevent what occurred in 2009?
So I'll tackle the first question. So we did not capture any information on the survey regarding political persuasion. The key demographics that we captured to compare with sentiments were sex, age, and education. And I know that there was a question online about socioeconomic status. We didn't capture that directly. Education, perhaps it's a distant relative of that. And we saw here, in terms of the educational category, that tertiary educated respondents and those who were educated at the highest at secondary school had similarly low sentiments or support for republicanism. So you can already see it didn't really make a big difference. I'll let Professor Bargels handle the second.
Jamal, if you could come back to the microphone, because the question you asked.
Second one was insulated. Okay,
No. The question you ask is quite provoking. It's very provocative. Yes. And therefore, I would like you to, it's very interesting. And rather than answer, I would like you to share with me some of your thoughts on what you think went wrong in 2009 and what you think can be done to repair that. Now, I am aware that both the government and opposition had supported numerous aspects of the constitutional design. But they fell on the eve of the referendum in relation to some very specific issues. Yeah?
Correct.
Right? On the issue of the executive president and some
CCG
other issues.
as well.
Yeah, on some other issue. Now, it would be easy for me to say to you that clearly one of the things that need to be done, especially given the results that we're seeing in terms of people who are unaware. Now, one of the first things you have to do is to engage in civic education.
Correct, yeah.
Right? To me, that's a minimal task in every single Caribbean country. That is what we need. That is what we need to do. But there are some things that's beyond that, because we do understand, and I think if we engage in civic education and people understand about governance issues, etc., they may be in a position where they might be able to overcome maybe their partisan leaning. But I'm also fully conscious of the fact that Caribbean countries are highly partisan, and I'm not sure to what extent we are going to see a dilution, yeah, of that partisanship, even in the context of higher civic education. That's the point I want to make, right? But I would like to hear from you about what you think went wrong and what potentially, and I know you're not going to give us a lecture, but.
Well, thank you. Well, first and foremost, the civic education is necessary. That is why it was puzzling to me with Grenada, because I think for Grenada, they're more in terms of what they went through in the Morris Bishop era, that the level of consciousness would not reflect that sort of number.
We must remember that this is 1979
Yes.
to 1984. And we have 2-3 generations that don't really know, not interested in those things, is passé. So we should again make those kinds of, and besides, in Grenada, maybe unlike what took place in St. Vincent, I don't think it's the same. Context matters. In Grenada, the opposition did mount a no vote.
Yes.
And the government did not even bother to mobilize support for their position, which is quite puzzling. There was no mobilization whatsoever. So we should not be surprised at the low voter turnout and the outcome that we saw in Grenada.
But clearly from the survey and even then, the lack of civic education is one, and it has to be done throughout the country from different groupings, including political parties, which are major organizations. The other one, of course, is why I asked the question in the first place, partisanship. And it was during, this was a year before the general elections. What is interesting, though, is that while the results went that way, the general elections again. So it's a bit of a conundrum in that regard. But surely bipartisanship has to be necessary, given the referendum, the majority required by the people, and foremost civic education. Clearly from the results, those who are neutral, those who don't care, it screams loudly, civic education is necessary.
Yeah, but it goes beyond just the don't care, don't know, and the neutrals. Even some of the responses you get about what are the likely benefits and how you benefit is troubling. And I mean, maybe St. Vincent is not that bad in relation to some of the responses that we get. But the other countries who believe that if we become a republic, suddenly all our connections with Britain would be terminated. And they make decisions, important decisions, on that belief. When you look around the Commonwealth of Caribbean, we already have 4 republics. And our relationship with Britain, with the Commonwealth, remains as strong with those republics as with but that's what people feel. And again, that is why the education becomes so critical before you can have such an important vote put out.
Good evening. I just first of all like to thank you for the presentation today. I think it's very stimulating and it goes to a very important matter of public debate and public concern in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for which there is a long established history, as you've been able to tell I'm just happy that we are at the stage of our existence where we are contemplating matters of constitutional change on the basis of the desires of the people. Because St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it had to be said in the course of history, has undergone several different stages of constitutional development, and it really never concerned what the interests of the majority of the population in St. Vincent and the Grenadines was concerned about, but rather the dictates of then our colonial masters. And, you know, I think that it is a little bit arrogant that we have been stuck with a system that is deeply entrenched and embedded and difficult, and possibly some persons might say even impossible to change. We are stuck with this even when a very different situation obtains in, say, the United Kingdom as far as changing constitution is concerned. And you might ask yourself or interrogate the question of the justice of this proposition in all the circumstances. I find it to be very interesting. I mean, when we look at the results of the results that you presented here tonight, you spoke about the fact that there is a very low appetite, it seems, from the results for a shift to a Republican form of government. I think that there are some issues with those results, because at the same time you simultaneously speak about a very low level of knowledge. And I really don't know, I can't bring myself to really conceptualize it. How could you test something on which there is very little knowledge in the population? People do not know what a republic form of government is. People do not know what a constitutional monarchy is, generally speaking, and I think that that came out in your results, in the findings, and therefore they are not able to be assessed on it because they do not understand it. Now, the other thing which I find to be very interesting is that you said that there is an appetite of only about 18.2% for change, and there's a suggestion that that is where the public sentiment is. We've also been looking at the referendum as a benchmark against which to judge things, and we've said that in the referendum, even though there was a big package of elements to consider, in the referendum, we've looked at it as a referendum against the change from the constitutional monarchy to a republic. So we then would have to observe the fact that there was a vastly higher turnout of the vote in the referendum for a for the transition than might seem to be consistent with public sentiment. Because if the public sentiment is at 18.2%, and in the referendum we were able to achieve a vote of over 40%, then it means that more people than the public sentiment suggests are already inclined to vote in favor of change. Whether or not that is something related to a political party is something I suppose that you might have to interrogate, and that aspect of it was raised to some extent by Augustine Ferdinand. The other thing in which I have some interest in general has to do with if we were in fact able to make the transition by some miracle to a constitutional monarchy, considering our current configuration. I think a great interest in the question of how we should elect the head of state in that new situation. I don't know if it has been studied very much, but in my own reflections, I have been thinking that we perhaps might do well to adopt a political system which is probably more closely modeled on the American political system, in which the head of state is elected and in which there are separate elections for the equivalent of the parliament. Maybe that might allow us to do greater justice to important concepts in government, including the separation of powers, and perhaps facilitate some other useful objectives from a national development standpoint. I think that I would leave it there. I just would like to finish by saying that I find it you made the point that Anguilla has a higher sentiment for constitutional monarchy than St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The only country I think that it was that had that higher sentiment, and that could be explained by its own situation in government. I observed that Montserrat, which is essentially in the same position as Anguilla, has a lower sentiment towards the constitutional monarchy than St. Vincent and well, Montserrat has a lower sentiment towards constitutional monarchy than St. Vincent. I find that very interesting indeed. But in relation to Anguilla, I remember the story which was told by Sir Fred Phillips, an eminent Vincentian who was the governor of St. Kitts. And I think the story helps to explain some of that high sentiment. He was the governor of St. Kitts Nevis, Anguilla, at a very interesting time of its history. And he recounted the visit of Queen Elizabeth to Anguilla during his tenure. And he said that there was an incident where after seeing the Queen, a lady crossed the road very carelessly and almost got run over by a vehicle. And the lady was not perturbed by the situation at all, because she said that she could dead now. Praise God, she see the Queen. Thank you.
Luke, right? Luke Brown, yes. Luke is another former student at Cable. I didn't teach him, but I know Luke. And you haven't changed much at all. Okay, I'm just going to make Luke, thank you for all of that. It's a lot. I'm not going to try to unpack this whole issue about how we select the head of state. It has to involve even the responses in St. Vincent, where most people would like to see the head of state elected. I don't know if due consideration has been given to the implications of the election. I mean, there's so many things we need to unpack about, and that requires our entire lecture on its own. So I'm not going to do injustice to that. But just to correct, I think you're probably getting a little confused by two things we said. One, in terms of countries which are ranked by the support for republic versus the monarchical system, St. Vincent and the Grenadines comes at number 5. Montserrat is at number 1, which is understandable. So Montserrat is more attached to the monarchy than, in fact, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which one understood. Not for republic, for, support for the monarchy is higher in Montserrat than in St. Vincent has the lowest support for the monarchy. But I think what you will go to the next one. I think the issue was more on and you can talk about the benefits. I think it's more an issue of the St. Vincent was below. I think it's the benefits. Perceived benefits on the British monarchy. Again, Montserrat is 73% and St. Vincent and the Grenadines is at 49%.
Yeah, I think the only other feature that came out from your response, and thank you for that discussion, was the sentiment that should we have tested sentiments of the populace if there's this large knowledge gap. But that was in fact the primary purpose of the survey. In fact, it was multifold. We had one purpose to look at how aware, how familiar Vincentians were regarding the different systems, and then move into their level of support for the different types of systems. And if you think about it, you can correlate those two variables. You can look at the lack of awareness or the awareness of a system and whether a particular person supports it. That's a very important thing, because we oftentimes make our decisions based on how much we know about a particular subject. And I think you've opened up the discussion that, you know, there's a need for this education. The only way that we would know that we need to educate and in what particular areas that we need to educate Vincentians is through research. And this is what this survey actually showed. In fact, one of the questions that we posed, which we didn't reveal here, it was a final question on the survey. What do you think the government needs to do to educate Vincentians better about this subject? And you'll be surprised the kinds of responses we got from putting it in schools. And yeah.
I think I just need to say that to remember the purpose of the survey. Remember the purpose of this project. It's not about asking specific political questions about Vincentians and so forth. It's really related to the role of the monarchy and perceptions of the monarchy in the Caribbean. And so we were sort of limited in relation to what kind of questions. There are a lot of interesting things we would like to have asked, but to ask those questions means we're going down a different path, which is not directly related to the objectives of the Visible Crown project in the Caribbean. And we had to be, I think, loyal to that project. It was about how we feel about the monarchy. Not how you feel about your politicians, but how we feel about the monarchy. Yeah?
Okay, and with that, we would want to thank the panelists.
I just want to see,
So you will make an appointment after? So with that, we would wish to thank the panelists.
we can share.
Okay. Right. So we wish to thank the panelists for that, for the evening you have given to us. We are leaving here more energized in terms of the information. And we would now invite Dr. Scott to do the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alexander Hamilton and Luke. Professor Devenish is the head of the School of Graduate Studies and Research, and he wants me to remind you that we are welcoming applications until the end of March, Professor. So you can set up your PhD. And I don't know if Professor Barrow Giles wants to be a supervisor, but I'm sure you can find someone, Luke, because there are certain arguments that you have put, and I'm sure an external examiner will be willing to entertain those arguments. Thank you very much for coming, Luke. Thank you so much for persons, Augustine, Rochelle, and all the others who came. Now, I first of all want to thank the St. Vincent site of the Global Campus, in particular the head of site, Dr. Risa Noel McBarnett, for allowing us to have this session here. When Professor Barrow Giles indicated that we would have it in St. Vincent, I got a call from Artist Davis saying that I should speak to Dr. Noel McBarnett, who is right at my side, attended a conference in Barbados, and right away she agreed to first have this here. I want to thank the technical people, in particular Nice Radio Communications, who organized the stage, the song, the light. I want to thank Anderson Paris of Bell Productions, Barbados Limited, who have been working on these things with me for over 25 years all across the region, working with President Obama and so on. And Bell Productions, if you're getting married in St. Vincent or in Barbados or anywhere in the Caribbean, check Bell Productions. I want to thank also CJ Bonady of Creative Media, who works along with UETV. This is going to be shown on UETV over and over. And CJ, as a good Vincentian, make sure he left Kville and came here to ensure that everything went well. I want to thank also my good friends, the guys from Touch, Willis Williams. Let's hear it for Willis Williams. Brian Paperback Alexander. Let's hear it for Paperback, the man from Stubbs. And also all Kitten Martindale, who was on guitar. And I understand that they will have a performance very soon in Kanawan, so listen to your radio. I want to thank VFM 99.9 Limited, which will bring over this, which will broadcast this tomorrow, and also Bay Hill Media, Montgomery Cupid, who tonight operated Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. I also want to thank the man with the white beard, Santino, Jose De Santos, who was at the mixing board, and who else? I forget. I forget anybody? Yes, Sandy. I won't forget you. You're from Kanawan. I just said we come to Kanawan. Nicholas Sandy, who also was the playback. Grantley Hyper Constance for his calypsos, and the Jim Maloney Drum Academy, which is a new NGO training musicians and represented by the leader Kwame, who kept it short tonight. Kwame, thank you especially for that. That's it. Online viewers, I recognize professors, a number of famous names online, some politicians and some academics, some of your past colleagues, and I thank them for joining. That's it. We have refreshments. Decima downstairs. We have refreshments downstairs. Okay, so let's go downstairs. And Luke, don't run away. We're going to continue downstairs. Thank you very much.
It is David.